of some immediate short-term gain almost inevitably ends up coming back and biting us. On the third question, of course, the right to blaspheme is a fundamental right, and it is something that the international human rights system looks at and has tried to protect. As Mr. Grieve suggested, we should respond, we should have a sense of humor when responding to questions that are caricatures of the Western arrogance, as Mr. Sardar pointed out. But in terms of the hardwiring, again, let me emphasize just kind of all you have to do is to go to Vietnam, a country that is fundamentally, has a fundamentally non-believing system, and which does a very, very good job of crushing any kind of religious belief that gets out of control. Or you look at the Chinese, which are in no way Muslim, and which have a very strong ability to crush religions. If you have to go to Gujarat to see what happens when Hindus believe that they have a monopoly on the truth. So this notion that any particular religion has these hardwired is, as John pointed out, binary, teleological, and creates the background music to extremism.
And as far as I know, it's the first time anything of this kind has been attempted. I've said on numerous occasions, both in the House and elsewhere, that we need to look at the underlying causes of violence and hatred, and that hasn't rung a bell yet. I went into the library at our end of the corridor and I asked, what works have you got by either Qutb or Maududi? And they said, sorry, we haven't got any at all. So this seems to me a symptom of what's lacking, that people are not looking at the teachings that come from those two ideologues. I mean, Maududi particularly in Pakistan, but Qutb also. And I think unless we get down to an analysis of how that doctrine has led to the situation that we have now, where so many young people are taking up violence, then we'll be missing the most important part of the task of curbing extremism and violence. But I agree also, if I may take up the last point, about Saudi Arabia. And I do think it's shocking the way that governments, all governments, not just this government, ignore what happens in Saudi Arabia and what the Saudi Arabians are doing in the region. I mean, for instance, the occupation of Bahrain by the Saudis. I mean, that was surely a violation of international law, and the Bahrainis who are in contact with us say they can't do anything because the Saudi troops are there to back up their own security forces in repressing the people. So I think that more outspokenness on both Saudi Arabia's actions in the region and on their own internal human rights problems, where they persecute the Shia and prevent them from praying in the way that they like to. There was a horrific episode last year when Shia women were trying to pray at what was the Prophet's tomb, and they were beaten up by the police and escorted off the premises. So, I mean, the Saudis have got a lot to answer for, and we shouldn't be silent about the human rights violations that they're perpetrating in their own country, as well as encouraging those overseas who are minded to listen to their message. Even in England, as we heard, there is some indication that a foothold has been maintained here. It came out in the general election, you know, Hazel, that in a particular constituency in Wandsworth, there were messages placed on the premises of tradesmen saying, don't trade with this butcher because he's an Ahmadi and an apostate. And there was a particular mosque in that constituency that was encouraging this conduct. And I think we should stamp on this. I mean, I think that the law on incitement to religious hatred is inadequate. In 2006, Parliament passed that Incitement Act, and there's only been one prosecution in all the time since then. And the reason is because the prosecution have to prove two things. Not only that the person in question incited religious hatred, but that he intended to incite religious hatred. And that makes it almost impossible for the Crown Prosecution Service ever to initiate proceedings. So I think we should address our own law to make sure that we are adequately protected against incitement of religious hatred in this country. But may I just conclude, Hazel, by saying I think this has been a terrific contribution that you've made this afternoon, and I thank the Ahmadi Muslim community for having arranged it. And I think when you look at their message of love for all and hatred for none, you hope that that can be spread, and that more and more people in the Muslim community as a whole will agree with the foundation of that message being applicable to their own conduct. As we've heard many times during the course of this discussion, there are ways of interpreting the Qur'an, just as there are means of interpreting every religious text, which vary considerably. But the interpretation which the Ahmadis have settled on strikes me as being the one that we should advocate and try to spread throughout our own community.
I think that's a really wonderful note to end on. Love for all, hatred for none. And if we could all subscribe to that, whatever our religion, then we would live in a much better world. I just want to thank all of you, the Ahmadiyya community, the all-party group, everybody who's been involved in the organisation. I have never known an audience sit here for 2.5 hours in such good spirits. And I want to thank every one of our contributors. But I suppose especially Shabrana for having come here specifically to make our event really come alive, and to wish her all the very best for the future. So thank you very much to all the panellists, thank you to you, and we'll close the event.
Many of those who came were pleased that such a variety of views and perspectives were shared, and they're looking forward to more debates in the future,
where a lot of different people can discuss different aspects of the basic right to religious freedom and non-discrimination, are very useful because they highlight that this is not a problem just in Pakistan or of just one community. It's not just a problem limited to the Muslim world. It's a problem that we see in many different countries, in many different religions, or in fact even governments that are officially non-believers like the Chinese or the Vietnamese, where they don't tolerate religious freedom properly. So that's the way forward. This is a problem for the whole world, and the solution requires global action.
Well, it's obviously a generational phenomenon, something that's come to consciousness really in the period following 9/11, although it was there beforehand. It's a problem which primarily is linked to the Pakistani British community, but also extends beyond that. So, as I say, a generational thing, something that's come into prominence in the 1990s, but has longer-term origins which stretch back to the 80s and the 70s.
And events like these, how do you see they play a role in tackling extremism?
I think the key thing about today's event is that it's happening slap bang in the middle of the political establishment in a room in Westminster, which means that difficult questions are asked and difficult answers are given, but in a way that politicians can hear in the centre of government. So more events of these are crucial, I think.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to say that by the grace of Allah, this meeting has gone very well. First thing is that the hall was completely packed. Secondly, the meeting went on for more than 2.5 hours, which is very exceptional and rare. Thirdly, the interest taken by all the participants, that was outstanding. And the views were mentioned, of course, on different subjects. But basically, the heartening thing is that more and more people are now, by the grace of Allah, coming to know about the Ahmadiyya community. They are getting more and more aware about the persecution and the difficulties that the community is facing in Pakistan and elsewhere. And many of them, they are coming out very openly and very boldly. They are supporting the stance of the Ahmadiyya community, and they are raising their voice against the systematic persecution of the community which is carried out in various countries. So this is very heartening and very encouraging, and I firmly believe that if this process continues, then the voice of Ahmadiyyat will be heard more effectively in these circles who are ultimately responsible for various good measures in various parts of the world to improve the situation. I particularly enjoyed the comment made by Lord Avebury almost towards the end of the meeting, when commenting on a previous statement regarding the interpretation of the Holy Quran. He said very openly that the interpretation made and given by the Ahmadiyya community, that should be taken because it is really very logical and very correct. So I think this view coming from a person, eminent person like Lord Avebury is something very great, and I wish and hope that this type of understanding of Ahmadiyya